When the end finally comes, it doesn't begin with an explosion. It doesn't look cinematic. It begins quietly. A strange news report at the bottom of the screen, a call to the morgue about missing bodies, a police scanner buzzing about uncooperative suspects who just won't stay down. Most people shrug. Another hoax, another headline to scroll past, and that disbelief, that very refusal to process the impossible is exactly how the impossible ends. In 1968, George A. Romero's Night of the Living Dead forced us to look at that moment of disbelief and watch it unravel, okay? His creatures weren't created by spells, ancient curses, or science experiments gone wrong. They weren't even really called zombies. They mentioned it a couple times back then, but they were just simply the dead. Romero doesn't explain how or why. Was it cosmic radiation, a virus we already carried inside of us, divine punishment? He leaves us with silence because silence is scarier than certainty. On that first night, 7 billion people, each one a potential enemy the moment their heart stops, okay? Hospitals become breeding grounds, wars turn into recruitment drives for the dead. Every funeral, every car accident, every natural death in a nursing home adds to the army stumbling out into the streets. Think about how fragile our systems really are, okay? Grocery stores carry 3 days of food, maybe 4. Cities depend on constant flow of trucks, planes, and ships. Water treatment plants need technicians on every shift. Now, imagine those people gone, or worse, still moving, but they're not on your side anymore. That's the brilliance of Romero's nightmare. It doesn't need to move fast, it just needs time. And the real terror isn't just the bite, it's what happens next. What happens when the power flickers out? What happens when the ambulance doesn't arrive? What happens when the neighbors turn on each other before the dead even get through the door? This is the scenario we're exploring tonight. We're going to dissect the anatomy of Romero's ghouls, watch civilization collapse piece by piece, and measure how humanity might actually respond if the dead stood up tomorrow. Because Romero's genius wasn't about monsters, it was about holding up a mirror to ourselves. And what that mirror shows is that the scariest thing isn't the dead at all. It's what the living do when the rules of life and death stop making sense. To understand how the world ends, we have to start at the beginning, okay? So inside the body of a ghoul itself is where we're going. So, welcome to Science of the Living Dead. Romero never hands us a neat scientific cause. In Night of the Living Dead, the closest we get is a throwaway news report of a Venus space probe that exploded in Earth's atmosphere. Radiation, alien bacteria, cosmic punishment. Romero's genius is leaving the mechanism deliberately fuzzy because the more you explain, the less that it scares you. But let's treat this like a crime scene and dissect what we can observe. Let's talk about universal reanimation. The most single terrifying law of Romero's universe is also the simplest. Anyone who dies comes back. It honestly doesn't matter if you've been bitten, shot, poisoned, or just, slip in the shower. If your brain's intact, you will rise, okay? That's what separates Romero's ghouls from almost any other zombie film ever made, okay? Haitian folklore describes zombies as the enslaved dead and animated by sorcery. Modern pop culture often blames viruses or bioweapons, but Romero, he makes death itself the trigger. And that idea changes everything. First, it means there's really no safe zone, okay guys? Quarantines don't matter. Military blockades don't matter because the moment someone dies inside of your perimeter, whether from disease, suicide, or accident, you got a brand new threat, and there's no way to walk out of that. Now let's talk about hospitals, because in hospitals the rule becomes absolutely catastrophic, okay? Every terminal patient, every failed surgery, every ventilator loss instantly creates another hostile. Healthcare systems designed to preserve life suddenly become factories literally producing the enemy. Let's consider this, guys. Globally, 165,000 people die every day of natural causes, all right? In a Romero outbreak, that's 165,000 new zombies daily, okay? Before a single bite even spreads to, infect anybody else further. So no virus in human history could scale that fast. Death itself becomes the ultimate force multiplier, and it also rewrites the psychology of survival. In Romero's world, grief is a liability. You can't mourn, you can't wait. The second a loved one dies, you have about minutes, sometimes even seconds to take care of the problem before you literally become the problem yourself. And this brings up some serious moral dilemmas. Do you destroy the body of your friend before they reanimate? Do you risk trying to tie them down, hoping science will find a cure, or do you hesitate, knowing hesitation means death for everyone else in the room because you're gonna be the risk for everyone else, and you're not even a fucking zombie yet. Universal reanimation is also what ensures total collapse. Natural disasters, warfares, famines, these things all produce mass casualties, and in Romero's world, every disaster snowballs into an outbreak within fucking hours, okay? And we're not even talking about just one country, we're talking worldwide, shit happening all the time, volcanoes, hurricanes, tornadoes. Think of this sort of like compound interest, but with corpses. The numbers double, triple, or even overwhelm in the best defenses, okay? There's no need for a mastermind for these zombies. There's no need for any sort of strategy. The world collapses under the weight of its own fucking system and structure and climate. And especially it collapses under its own morality, and that's why Romero zombies endure, okay? They don't need fast legs, they don't need claws or glowing eyes, okay? Their strength is their inevitability. You can fight the dead, but in the end, you're gonna fucking become one. Brainstem hijack, okay? If universal reanimation is the law, then the brainstem is the engine. Romero's creatures don't talk, they don't reason, they don't build or plan, but they walk, they bite, they hunt, and that tells us something critical, okay? Higher brain function is gone, but primitive control centers are still active. The human brain is layered like an archaeological site. At the top, the cerebral cortex handles language, decision-making, creativity, things that make us human, pretty much. Things that make us human, all right? Romero zombies have none of that, and that's why they stagger instead of sprint, moan instead of speak, and fixate on flesh instead of strategy. But underneath the cortex lies the limbic system and the brainstem. The primitive machinery controls reflexes, aggression, balance, and survival drives. In Romero's world, that is the part that gets hijacked by these zombies. The medulla oblongata manages breathing and heartbeat. In zombies, these systems should be dead, yet somehow reflexive movement remains kind of like a twitch in a frog's leg when you run electrical current through it, you know? The pawns midbrain regulate posture and motor signals, and that's why Romero's ghouls can shuffle on ruined legs. Their coordination is clumsy but relentless. The hypothalamus, buried deep in the limbic system, controls hunger and aggression. In Romero's Dead, it's stuck in overdrive, pretty much. There's no stopping, okay? It's just endless hunger, okay? Let's talk about real-world parallels to this, okay? Rabies hijack the limbic system, and they create an irrational aggression and compulsive biting, okay? It's creepy. Prion diseases turn brainstem tissue into spongy waste, kind of leaving victims alive but stripped of their memory and judgment, for example. Even decapitated animals like snakes or chickens, they show motor activity long after high brain death, which we see within these ghouls. Romero's zombies are nightmare fusion of all three of what I just mentioned. What makes it so horrifying is the efficiency. By bypassing the needs for conscious thought, the ghoul becomes pure instinct, okay? It doesn't negotiate, it doesn't hesitate, it doesn't stop. The same part of the brain that keeps a newborn breathing keeps a corpse shambling towards you. And if you're ever wondering why destroying the brain is the only way to kill them, it's because once the brainstem's gone, the machine finally shuts down, and, you know, sever limbs all you want, but, you know, they still crawl. But, you know, crush the stem and the puppet strings go to slack, okay? Think of it this way, okay? Romero stripped away humanity down to its ugliest, most animal function. A walking appetite with just enough coordination to find you. Motor function without life. Here's the paradox that keeps scientists awake at night. The dead tissue shouldn't fucking move, okay? Muscles don't contract on willpower. They rely on a molecule called ATP, a fuel that cells make by burning oxygen and glucose. When the heart stops, oxygen stops circulating, and ATP runs out within minutes. The body stiffens into rigor mortis, then slowly relaxes as proteins degrade. By every biological rule, Romero's corpses shouldn't even take a single fucking step, guys. And yet, they do. For days, sometimes even weeks, Romero's Dead stagger, lunge, and claw as though physics kind of forgot about itself. How could that work? Theory 1, residual electrical activity, okay? Even in death, nerve cells can carry a charge for a short amount of time. Experiments on frog legs in the 18th century show that they twitch when electricity passed through them. Romero zombies might represent a system where the brainstem pumps constant flow of low voltage signals into the muscle fibers, bypassing the need for metabolism, okay? Then we got theory 2, all right? The pathogen-produced fuel. If an unknown microbe or prion is driving this reanimation, maybe it manufactures its own form of ATP substitute, you know, an unnatural energy cycle that keeps muscles firing just enough for movement. Never explained though, but hey, that could be with alien or biological weapons. We never fucking know. Insects infected by cordyceps fungi can move even as their tissues rot from the inside out because the parasite that keeps rewriting their motor signals keeps fucking controlling them. Imagine that, but scaled to a human body. Then we got theory number 3, which is the structural degradation. Notice how Romero's ghouls don't sprint or leap. Their gait is clumsy, uneven, kind of like machines with broken parts. That is consistent with decayed ligaments and stiff joints. They're not immune to physics, they're just kind of working with whatever they fucking got. In real world conditions, heat speeds up the decay. In the summer, muscle fibers would liquefy within fucking days, especially out here in Vegas, baby. But in the cold, like in Pittsburgh, where the films take place and where I'm from, baby. But the cold in the Pittsburgh area would preserve tissue, so in the Pittsburgh winter, ghouls might last weeks before collapsing into like a bone and sludge. Even if a zombie only lasted 48 hours, universal reanimation, which we know endures. You know, there's always a fresh wave of recruits. The bodies don't need to endure forever, they just need to endure long enough to kill you before they collapse. Or within the next day when another 100,000 fucking reanimated people who died of natural causes come into play. And that's why Romero's creatures are so effective. They don't run on blood, breath, or biology as we know it, they run on inevitability. So let's talk about the sensory package as well. If Romero's zombies are running on a broken brainstem and rotting muscles, the next question is how do they find us? Because on the surface, the answer seems simple. They see, they hear, and they maybe even smell us, but whenever you watch closely, Romero's films reveal a sensory profile that's stranger and more unsettling than it really first appears, okay? So let's talk about their vision. And the zombies in the Romero universe respond strongly to movement. In Night of the Living Dead, they turn towards headlights and shifting silhouettes, but there's no sign of advanced vision, there's no hunting in the dark, no tracking, the fine detail. Their eyes are pale, clouded, sometimes literally decaying in their sockets, and that suggests degraded photoceptors. They see just enough contrast and motion to recognize prey. So think of it less like human eyesight and more like the blurred monochrome version of a cataract patient. Now let's talk about their hearing really quick. We have sound. However, you know, sound's critical. Gunshots, slam doors, even voices draw them like moths to a flame. Romero's ghouls often ignore like still silent survivors until like the noise betrays them, you know? And this aligns with what we know about the midbrain and the brainstem. It routes auditory reflexes far more efficiently than visual processing. In other words, zombies hear faster than they think because they don't think at all, obviously. Now, let's quickly talk about their smell. In Dawn of the Dead, zombies seem to notice the smell of living flesh, but Romero never really confirms it outright. It could explain how they differentiate between other corpses and us, though, with their smell behavior. But in practical terms, smell is unreliable, especially when your own nasal tissue is rotting away. Now let's talk about the touch really quick, okay? They're driven by tactile response. In close quarters, zombies grope, claw, and grip with relentless pressure. They don't pull punches or, you know, gauge force, they just kind of squeeze until something fucking gives. This suggests a primitive feedback loop. They, you know, grab, hold, bite, you know. Why this matters though, the sensory limits are what makes Romero's world both terrifying and survivable. Silence becomes a weapon, they can move quietly, and you can bypass entire fucking hordes. Silence can become a weapon, because if you can move silently, you can bypass entire hordes, alright? Light discipline also matters, because a single flashlight in the night could draw every fucking corpse in a 2-block radius. Noise discipline is life or death. Once a gunshot is fired, it's a beacon announcing where you are and how much fresh meat's available, okay? So let's talk about some kind of real world situations with this here, all right? Sharks also can detect movement and vibration long before they can even identify a shape, all right? Owls use sound to triangulate their prey more accurately than they can with their sight in some low light. Even humans in pitch black rely, you know, on auditory cues to kind of orient themselves to this. Romero stripped the senses down to their rawest form, creating predators who don't really need strategy, just enough perception to find you and enough persistence to never stop chasing until they do fucking get you, all right? Which leads to the cruel irony. The dead don't need to see you clearly. They don't need to smell you perfectly. The only one thing, the one single thing that they need is you just need to make a mistake. One mistake loud enough to bring them to your door, all right? That's all it fucking takes. So let's talk about their feeding behavior, okay? We've covered how Romero's dead walk, how they kind of sense us, and how they keep moving, but now comes the most unsettling question. Why do they eat exactly? From the first corpse tearing into raw flesh in Night of the Living Dead, the image of the zombie has been inseparable from cannibalistic hunger, but here's the biological paradox. Romero's zombies don't digest. By all logic, eating should serve really no purpose at all. And yet their behavior persists. Theory 1 is instinctual compulsion, okay? If the brainstem and the hypothalamus are reactivated, the primal hunger drive would flicker without the system being able to shut it off in any sort of way. Romero's zombies are locked in a permanent hunger, unlike humans, and that's an itch that these zombies can never really scratch. Theory 2 is the transmission vector. Bites cause secondary infection, even though reanimation occurs universally. It's possible that the feeding drive evolved a redundant mechanism to ensure a more direct transmission. Okay, kind of like rabies compelling animals to bite and spread the virus, Romero zombies may be acting as an unconscious carrier. Then we got theory 3, which is the predator simulation. And here's another possibility. What we're seeing isn't hunger at all, but aggression expressed through feeding behavior. Many predators bite not because they really need to eat, but because they attack and consumption are neurologically linked. Think of sharks that keep biting even though their stomachs are full, or cats that hunt for stimulation rather than food, okay? Psychological impact on survivors. From a storytelling standpoint, feeding behavior isn't about biology, it's about the horror, obviously. The sight of the dead feasting strips away dignity, turning human remains into a grotesque meal. In a real world outbreak, this effect would compound complete fucking collapse, okay? Mass panic would spread faster than infection when people see loved ones literally being devoured in the streets right in front of them. So here's the practical takeaways from this, okay? Zombies don't need to eat to survive, which means they never stop hunting, okay? And the symbolic core of all of this is Romero himself often described his zombies as mirrors on humanity. They're feeding as a grotesque parody of consumer culture and an endless appetite. Damage tolerance, okay? Romero's dead are grossly resilient. You can hack a limb, you can pour acid on a hand, you can even sever, you can sever their head and you'll still get movement and a threat. And that's not even magic. It's disturbed neuromuscular activity, okay? In real biology, motor function runs along two basic paths. We have the centralized control from the brain and localized reflex arcs in the spinal cord and peripheral nerves type of thing. Romero gives us the worst of both worlds. A damaged higher brain with spinal and peripheral circuits are still firing. That's why a dismembered limb can twitch and why torsos can convulse after decapitation. Practically, this means two things. First, hitting non-cranial targets rarely neutralizes the threat. A severed arm may still grasp, a body with a smashed ribcage can still lurch, and second, partial damage can be worse than no damage at all. A torso that keeps crawling towards you will still get close enough to bite, and that is a brutal, ugly, and efficient survival instinct for the zombies, okay? So here's some key takeaways from this. Non-cranial damage buys time, but not safety. Severed parts are still hazardous, so treat them as hostile because they're still, they're still fucking there, all right? Decomposition will eventually end the motion, but you can't rely on time within this type of an outbreak. Termination protocol, okay? There's only two universal termination options in the Romero world. You can either destroy the brain or destroy the body so it can't come back, and everything else is kind of a workaround. So there's no wounding until it stops type of solution that's reliably safe, okay? Destroy the brain, complete cranial destruction, crushed, shattered, burned to ash, okay? That's the most reliable kill, okay? Just fucking kill the brain. We all know the zombie rules, but are we all going to follow them when the time comes? Containment's only a backup, okay? It's not the main option, okay? If someone dies in your group, you gotta give them immediate isolation. Let's talk about the tactical standpoint, what actually works, okay? So forget action movie fantasies. Tactical thinking in a Romero scenario is boring and methodical. A bunch of fucking people out there think they have a plan for a zombie apocalypse. They're gonna be some of the first to fucking die. So let's just close this chapter in plain terms. Universal reanimation makes every death a threat. Brainstem hijack turns people into single-minded predators. Motor function without life means movement can persist past decay. Senses are primitive, but super fucking effective. Sound and motion can kill you though. And remember, feeding is a compulsion, not a nutrition. Endless appetite means endless pressure. So damage tolerance makes anything but cranial termination unreliable. Termination protocol is simple and brutal: destroy the brain or destroy the body, but have no exceptions. These are the operating rules, guys, okay? That's the machine you're up against. If you internalize this, then you stop romanticizing heroes and start, designing survivable systems, okay? Just make it quiet, efficient, ruthless, whenever you need to, necessary, okay? In the next chapter, I'm going to show you what these systems look like when everything else starts to fail, and how cities fold when supply chains die, and how the math of morality can turn a bad night into the end of civilization. So now that we understand what the Romero ghoul is physically capable of, it's time to follow the infection from the morgue to Main Street, okay? Stage 1, information failure, all right? The first domino in Romero's apocalypse isn't the bite, it isn't the horde, it's the collapse of information. In Night of the Living Dead, we watch the world stumble in real time through radio reports and grainy TV broadcasts, and nobody knows what's happening. And scientists argue, military spokesmen contradict them, news anchors waffle between calling them ghouls or just murder-happy maniacs or victims of radiation. The public isn't given clarity, they're just given noise. That is an infection. That's how real disasters unfold. During the 1918 influenza pandemic, newspapers downplayed infection numbers to preserve wartime morale, costing tens of thousands of lives. And in the early days of COVID-19, if you guys remember, mixed messages about masks and travel bans doubled infection rates in some regions. So when information is contradictory, people hesitate, hesitation kills, and in a Romero outbreak, the consequences are immediate. We see survivors stay at home when they should run. We see families break curfews in search of loved ones and relatives. Hospitals are flooded because the public just thinks it's just a disease that can be treated, and while experts argue on air, corpses are already walking through the door. The psychology is devastating, and people trust official voices until they fucking can't. And when trust breaks, it breaks violently. Rumors spread faster than facts, stories of cannibal cults, terrorist attacks, foreign invasions. By the time governments agree on a language, the population's already filled the silence with panic. Consider this, okay? In the United States, roughly 90% of adults consume news through TV, radio, or digital feeds. In a blackout, those sources collapse into a void without a trustworthy information. Communities fracture into silos of rumor, militia broadcasts, or outright denial. Some barricade themselves, others flood highways in mass exodus, and both choices feed the fucking problem, okay? Romero's genius was showing this unraveling in real time, all right? The cackle on the radio, the conflicting TV bulletins, the uncertainty in every voice. And he's right, because in any real crisis, the first battle isn't against the threat, it's against the chaos of our own minds. Once information breaks, coordination dies with it, and when coordination dies, the dominoes fall fucking fast. The grid flickers out, supply chains collapse, the panic fills every gap left behind. Stage 2, the infrastructure meltdown. Once information collapses, the next domino is inevitable, and that's the infrastructure failure. Civilization is a fragile illusion held together by people showing up to work. So Romero understood this in Dawn of the Dead. We see cities choked with chaos as services stop, lights go out, and survivors flee. But let's break down how it would really unfold step by step. Let's talk about the power grid, okay? The electric grid is one of the most complex machines on Earth. It relies on constant human oversight, so if engineers and technicians abandon their posts, or worse, fucking reanimate, at the controls, then we're gonna have blackouts. They're gonna happen within hours. When a power plant fails, demand shifts to the next one, causing the domino effect. This isn't even hypothetical, because in 2003, a single tree branch fucking tripped a line in Ohio, triggering a cascade that blacked out like 50 million people across the US and Canada, and that was from one branch. Now imagine thousands of workers not showing up at once. We have water and sanitation, all right? Every city relies on pumps, chemical treatments, and sewage systems that can't run themselves, so within days, tap water would turn brown. Within weeks, cholera and dysentery would join the zombies as these invisible killers, okay? Romero hinted at this with the grime and disease of his survivors' shelters, but in reality, sanitation failure would kill as many as the undead. Food supply chains, okay? Your grocery store carries maybe 3 days of food at max. That food doesn't just appear, it's delivered by truckers who themselves are relying on fuel, sleep, and a functioning grid. One missed cycle, shelves will empty. 2 missed cycles, there's where the violence starts. In 2021, a 6-day supply chain disruption caused bare shelves across the UK due to driver shortages. In a Romero event, it's not just a shortage, it's a complete system failure. Let's talk about the healthcare system. Hospitals are the first to fall, not because the zombies are outside, but because of the dead inside. Every lost patient becomes a new hostile. Hey, so does every other safety net. No paramedics, no trauma care, no medication refills. Chronic conditions kill just as surely as bites. Let's talk about the communication networks, okay? Cell towers need power, okay? Servers need cooling. The internet is a living organism that dies without constant upkeep. So within a week, social media vanishes. Radios and ham operators might linger, but the global network we depend on would fracture into silence. The domino effect, okay? Once the first systems fail, the others follow, okay? No power means no refrigeration. No refrigeration means food spoilage. Food spoiled means starvation, riots, and more deaths, which means more zombies. We think we're fucking resilient, but civilization is a stack of cards balanced on people just showing up for work. Stage 3, panic kills faster than bites. By the time the grid sputters out and the shelves are bare, the dead don't need to overrun us. We do it ourselves. Romero's message is brutal. Humans are the accelerant in this disease. The deaths caused by panic, riots, accidents, or prior decisions can outpace the primary threat. During Hurricane Katrina, for example, looting, misinformation, and law enforcement confusion caused as much damage as the storm itself. In the 1977 New York blackout, looting and arson spread faster than emergency responders could even act, overwhelming the entire neighborhood. Chaos isn't just dangerous, it's fucking contagious. Let's talk about mob psychology. People behave differently in crowds. Fear is viral. A single gunshot in a crowded street can start a stampede. In an outbreak, that stampede isn't just bodies trampling each other, it's thousands feeding the next wave of zombies fucking trying to find somebody, because remember the sound we talked about. Psychology studies call this de-individualization, when people stop thinking as individuals and start following the frenzy of the crowd. Violence and friendly fire. The irony of Romero's world is that the dead are slow, predictable, and even avoidable. It's the living who are, violent. So in Day of the Dead, we have soldiers and scientists turning on each other, and that's way long before the compounds fail. History supports this during the 1992 Los Angeles riots, where more than half of the deaths came not from the police or the gang fire, but from civilians caught in the crossfire and the accident. Every bullet fired is more likely to hit the living than the dead in this situation. All right, now let's talk about the breakdown of trust here. Panic erodes cooperation. A bitten survivor hides their wound, a neighbor hoards food, suspicion turns friends into liabilities, and in a scenario where the dead are patient, distrust is lethal. Groups fracture, leaders are overthrown, and survivors sabotage each other's barricades out of paranoia. All right, let's talk about the survival implications here. Panic creates more corpses than zombies can, all right? Order dies faster than infrastructure. Human violence, paranoia, and bad decisions become the true engine of collapse here. In this universe, the apocalypse is inevitable, not because the dead are strong, but because the living are fucking weak here. Stage 4, military overload. So when panic takes hold and the systems collapse, there's one institution that people still expect to save them, and that's the military. Tanks, helicopters, soldiers in formation, images of order against chaos, but in Romero's world, even the military can't hold the line. Let's talk about the initial superiority. At first, it looks like the army has the advantage. In Night of the Living Dead, we see militia units sweeping the countryside, gunning down ghouls with precision. In Dawn, we have National Guard units looting supplies while maintaining control. Firepower isn't the problem, attrition is. So let's talk about the mathematics of attrition. Modern militaries are designed to absorb losses, but Romero flips the script, okay? Every casualty isn't just a loss, it reinforces for the enemy. If a platoon loses 20 soldiers, that's 20 more bodies standing up in the kill zone, okay? No army on Earth is trained for an enemy that multiplies with every bullet fired. And we have the urban combat nightmare here. Cities are death traps, so clearing buildings requires close quarters fighting, exactly the kind of environment where bites, scratches, and ambushes multiply casualties. Let's talk about the morale and fragmentation. Romero captures this in Day of the Dead, where the soldiers barricaded in a bunker don't collapse from the zombies outside until the end, but from paranoia, resentment, and fear inside. History proves this too. Prolonged, unwinnable fights fracture morale. Obviously, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, military superiority doesn't prevent exhaustion, disobedience, or collapse when the enemy seems endless. In a Romero outbreak, soldiers aren't just facing the dead, they're facing the erosion of their own will to fight. Now let's talk about the logistics, which is the hidden killer here. Armies run on fuel, ammo, and food, okay? When the infrastructure's gone, the supply chain's gone. With every refinery shut down and every mechanic either fled or reanimated, heavy hardware becomes just immobile steel, okay? And without logistics, the most powerful army becomes just another group of survivors with rifles. Let's talk about the civilian fallout. Military overreach leads to civilian casualties. Desperate governments might bomb infected cities, torch suburbs, or impose lethal quarantines. In Diary of the Dead, we see this hinted at through propaganda and censorship, truth buried under the "Stay Calm" slogan. What does military defeat look like in a Romero world? It looks like abandoned bases, stripped convoys, downed helicopters and highways. It looks like survivors raiding armories, not because the soldiers failed, but because the system feeding them failed, okay? Which brings us to the survivors themselves, okay? The last layer of the order of the world where government systems and armies have already collapsed. Think about what this means for you, though, as the viewer. With the phones dead, the water brown, and the hospitals are silent, the real question isn't if society collapses, it's how long you last once it does. When the world stops working, what do you do next? In the next chapter, we're gonna step inside the barricades and dissect the hard lessons from Romero's survivors, what works, what fails, and what a real-world playbook might actually look like. Survivor tactics. Civilization's gone, the power's out, police radios are just static. All that stands between you and a world full of hungry corpses is whatever you can build, scavenge, or steal. In Romero's films, survivors aren't superheroes. They're behavioral experiments. Every group is a case study in what works, and more importantly, what doesn't. So we're gonna talk about the barricade strategy from Night of the Living Dead. The barricade is the oldest instinct in survival. You block the door, close the windows, make the walls higher. In Romero's universe, barricades are the first line of defense, but they're also the first to fail. Ben, for example, in Night of the Living Dead spends hours nailing boards across doors and windows, but the cracks in his group's discipline undo everything. So let's break it down. How do you actually make a barricade work, and how do you avoid repeating the same mistakes survivors always make on screen? First thing you want to do, choose your fucking environment, guys. Farmhouses and suburban homes, high visibility, plenty of materials like wood and tools, but unfortunately, there's too many points of entry. Every window is a liability, and the survival guide, the zombie survival guide, warns us to never assume that the home is defensible unless you can cover every access point. Let's talk about urban buildings also. Apartments and other, vertical advantages. Zombies struggle with stairs and ladders, but escape routes must be secured. Roof access is fucking critical. Now let's talk about the malls, schools, and hospitals, like from Dawn of the Dead and Day of the Dead. Okay, abundant supplies. They have plenty of supplies, but they're too large to secure. Survivors often overestimate their ability to guard every single entrance. And large spaces invite not just zombies, but also hostile individuals like the bikers that we see in Dawn of the Dead, for example. Here's a rule of thumb from the Zombie Survival Guide. Choose structures with the fewest doors and windows, highest vantage, and multiple exits. Okay. The best barricade is one you don't need to stretch thin across dozens of openings. Let's talk about the materials and methods, okay? Wood is fast and available, but weak under pressure. Works best layered, with cross bracing. And obviously you have furniture, desk shelves, pianos are good for instant blockage and barricade, but they're not structural, and zombies can topple stacked objects just by sheer persistence. You get enough of those zombies up against the door, and it doesn't matter what you got in front of it. Let's do metal and concrete. It's ideal for permanent strength holds, but chain link fencing or steel doors can kind of redirect the force, but heavy equipment is rarely on hand in the first 24 hours after an incident like this. Vehicles, for example, cars and trucks can seal driveways or, ground floor doors, but engines are noisy and they attract a lot of attention. So just a little tip here, don't just block entrances, okay? Redirect them. Funnel the zombies towards choke points that you can actually control. Barricades aren't just walls, they're tools for kind of shaping the flow of the enemy here. Now let's talk about these structural weak points here. Windows, even boarded windows, can be clawed through if the boards are, inside the frame, obviously. Always board from the outside whenever possible, okay? Basements, for example, cellars can feel safe, but look at Night of the Living Dead, for example. They can turn into tombs if they're breached by the undead. So always have a secondary escape hatch. Roofs, great for surveillance and extraction, but, weight load is limited. Too many people on a roof, you risk collapse. And in Night of the Living Dead, the cellar feels like the safest bet, but one door, easy to block, but it's a death trap, no exit. Romero forces you to way safely versus, mobility. We've talked about this in the previous with rules of noise and light discipline. A barricade doesn't mean silence stops mattering, okay? Hammering nails draws attention, shouting arguments draw attention, even lighting a window at night can draw hundreds of eyes towards you. In the Zombie Survival Guide, Max Brooks says to black out your windows, move quietly, and never advertise your position with unnecessary construction once the dead are near. Build early, not late. Let's talk about manpower and maintenance. The barricade is only as good as the people maintaining this motherfucker, okay? So rotate watch shifts. Fatigue can equal mistakes, people fall asleep. Assign someone to patrol the interior for kind of weak spots and have a designated crew for repair, boards, nails, duct tape should be ready quick. You should have all of these ready to go and have your maintenance crew there. And Romero shows us the truth. People fall before the walls do, okay? The farmhouse wasn't breached by sheer force. It was cracked open by indecision, poor planning, and one too many weak doors. And that's why we have to have our escape planning. The survival guide really stresses one core principle: never barricade without a secondary exit. Fire escape, rooftop hatch, or tunnels, mandatory, okay? Barricades buy time, not victory, so treat them as pauses to resupply, regroup, or wait without waves, but don't treat it as a permanent solution. Let's talk about the psychological factor. Barricades provide the illusion of safety, okay? People relax, they argue, they forget that wooden nails aren't stronger than hunger and persistence out there. Romero's survivors always kind of falter here, they make mistakes. One temporary defense for a permanent solution, and that's always a fatal error. We see it in every fucking movie. So is the home barricade hopeless? Not at all, but build early, quietly, and with discipline. Barricade can buy you days, maybe weeks, enough time to rest, plan, and maybe even strike back, okay? But remember, walls don't save you, they just delay the inevitable. And, sooner or later, the dead will prevail. While we're on the topic of survivor tactics, let's go to the next phase, which we see in Dawn of the Dead, and this is the mall mirage. In Dawn of the Dead, the survivors find exactly that, okay? It's a paradise in a world gone completely mad. But the mall is just a mirage, and like most mirages, it fades into a death. Kind of like you wouldn't even fucking believe. Literally, actually. But here's why the mall feels perfect. All right, we have abundance of supplies, we have food, clothing, weapons, even luxury items. Survivors feel rich. They feel like they're living on top of the world. And it's a familiar environment. Everyone knows how a mall works. It feels like a slice of the old world. It's got a defensible layout. It's got large walls, few entrances, built-in security shutters. The psychological comfort, consumer spaces create the illusion of normalcy. Survivors play house, pretend the apocalypse isn't at the front fucking door. And Romero understood this irony. The survivors turned the mall into a fortress, then slip into consumer habits, trying on clothes, playing arcade games, eating, feasts while the world collapses outside. They're living on top of the world. But the tactical reality is problem number one: there are too many entrances. Most malls have dozens of access points, loading bays, service doors, fire exits, skylights, ventilation shafts. Even if 80% are secure, the 20% you miss could be your death sentence. All right, here's a pro tip from the Zombie Survival Guide: choose structures with minimal entry points. The mall fails this test, obviously. Size works against you also. A mall is massive. Guarding it requires manpower, which you don't fucking have. Too much square footage, too many blind spots, too much ground to cover. A small team gets stretched thin until, gaps open. Then you have visibility. You have glass storefronts, open atriums, skylights. Malls are designed to show you everything, okay? That works in retail, but in survival, it means every movement, every flashlight beam is visible to outsiders and the undead, okay? We have this false sense of security in a mall, okay? The mall creates comfort decay, the illusion that you're safe just because you're surrounded by supplies. In Dawn, the group slowly drops their guard, which we see throughout the entire movie. Gunshots echo through the halls, noise discipline vanishes, and eventually they draw attention from raiders and other hordes of zombies out there, okay? So it's a psychological trap. Survivors confuse abundance with sustainability, but supplies aren't renewable. Once they're gone, the fortress becomes just another fucking tomb, which we see in every single Romero film. Then we have the human factor, okay? The mall isn't just tempting you, it's luring you in, it's tricking you, okay? You have to worry about rival survivors. In Dawn, the bikers invade, not the zombies, okay? They don't want food, they want control and chaos. You have the attraction radius of all this too. Also, a mall is filled with light, sound, and motion becomes a beacon visible for fucking miles out there. Survivors who broadcast abundance become targets for both the living and the dead. And then you have a whole entire, civil war risk you gotta worry about in a group. Malls amplify social breakdown. Do we ration supplies or do we splurge? Do we stay or do we leave? Do we fight intruders or do we run from the intruders? Abundance breeds arrogance and arrogance breeds conflict. So here's what the Zombie Survival Guide actually teaches us here. Avoid large, high-profile structures. They attract as much danger as they promise resources. Supplies are not security. Stockpiles vanish fast without a resupply chain. Luxury kills discipline. Comfort makes survivors soft, slow, and careless. And instead, Max Brooks emphasizes mobility and sustainability. A backpack, a bike, and a renewable resource beats a fortress with a food court that's gonna not have any good food in it after a fucking week. Let's talk about real-world parallels of this situation. Let's go back to Hurricane Katrina again, like we discussed in the last chapter. Stores and malls were looted within days, not because people were evil, but because centralized supplies draw desperate crowds. And then we have the modern riots. Like, large retail centers are always like the first targets because they represent abundance. In an outbreak, malls wouldn't be a fortress, they'd be magnets, okay? So here's the lesson of the mall, okay? In Romero's world, the mall isn't just a building, it's a metaphor, and it shows how quickly humans fall back into, consumerism and comfort, even when death is clawing at the glass, literally like we see in the movie, okay? It's the mirage of thinking you've beaten the apocalypse when you've really only just kind of delayed the inevitability of what the apocalypse is going to bring you. Okay, the mall looks like salvation, but in reality, it's a prison with a food court. All right, and as Romero showed us, the walls never fall to hunger alone. They fall to arrogance, complacency, and human enemies who want what you have, which brings us to the next survival dilemma. If abundance is a trap, what about isolation? So in this next section, we're going to descend underground into the bunkers of Day of the Dead and ask whether solitude can ever save us when the world above already belongs to the dead. All right, now let's talk about the bunker gamble from Day of the Dead. So if the mall is the mirage of abundance, the bunker is the promised safety through isolation, for example. So in Day of the Dead, the survivors retreat to an underground military facility. There's thick walls, reinforced doors. The dead can't get in, literally. They can't get in. On paper, it's fucking perfect. But here's the gamble. A bunker may keep the zombies out, but it also keeps you in, and that sooner or later, the walls you built to protect yourself are going to start feeling like a fucking coffin. And here's why bunkers feel secure, okay? Physical defense, you have reinforced concrete, steel, blast doors, limited access points, ideal against the slow persistence of Romero's dead. And then you have, your resource storage, military or fallout shelters, often pre-stocked with food, fuel, and medical supplies. So you should be fucking good there, right? But you also have, the isolation from chaos. There's no rioters, there's no looters, there's no accidental breaches from wandering hordes outside. On the surface, the bunker looks like the endgame answer. Ride it out until the dead fucking rot away. But you have the practical flaws here. You have air and ventilation. Air is finite underground, all right? Filters need maintenance, generators need fuel, and ventilation shafts are weak points. Unguarded, they're potential zombie access routes for sabotage targets, They can sabotage that shit. Then you also have the water situation. Stored water runs out. Wells require pumps require power. Once the generator dies, so does the clean water. Then you have fuel. Generators are lifesavers, but fuel supply is also not infinite here, so when the tanks run dry, you're left in the dark with no ventilation, no refrigeration, and no communication, right? Then you got the space and sanitation parts where you have tight quarters. They magnify disease. One flu outbreak in a sealed bunker could wipe out an entire fucking group. Waste disposal, if neglected, turns the living space very fucking toxic. Then you got the human factor here, which we see in the movies. We see all this in the movie, but you have isolation magnifies conflict. In Day of the Dead, the soldiers clash with the scientists. Then you have paranoia that festers and authority collapses from within. Then you have psychological strain. Being trapped underground with no horizon, no sunlight, no escape breeds depression, paranoia, and violence. Military psychologists studying submarine crews and Antarctic researchers found that confinement environments cause breakdowns in highly trained groups. And we're talking highly trained groups here, okay? So you got the trust decay. Every death inside a bunker is immediate fucking danger. Reanimation in sealed quarters is catastrophic. Unlike an open farmhouse, there's no space to fucking retreat in an underground bunker. The survival guide takeaway from this is, like Max Brooks calls bunkers a short-term solution at best. They're finite spaces with finite resources. They collapse under poor leadership and lack of planning. The best survivors use them as waypoints, not permanent homes. They're places to rest and resupply, and then leave before the walls become your fucking coffin, okay? You got real world parallels to this. In World War II bunkers, many became tombs for soldiers inside whenever supplies ran out or the exits fucking collapsed on them. Then you have Cold War shelters, which were stockpiled with stockpiles were designed for weeks, not years, and the assumption was temporary refuge, not, indefinite survival. Then you have the modern prepper shelters, the doomsdayers. Every luxury bunker today advertise 1 to 5 years of survival at best, but what happens when that fucking timer runs out? You gotta go up, and you better have enough ammo. You're fucked. Here's the psychological trap of a bunker. The mall lures you without comfort, but what happens after that timer runs out? So here is the psychological trap. The mall lures you with comfort. The bunker lures you with, permanence. Both are fucking lies. The mall makes you complacent, the bunker makes you stagnant. In Romero's world, survival isn't about waiting, it's about adapting. The dead don't get tired, they don't get impatient. They'll wait forever at the gates while you run out of food and sanity. And here's some practical world takeaways you can take from this. With location, rural beats urban. Population density is the enemy. You have noise discipline. Gunfire is a dinner bell. Silent weapons, crossbows, spears, suppressed firearms. They extend survival by lowering detection radius. Then you got the redundancy issue. Multiple exits, water sources, and communication lines are fucking critical. Your crew selection, competence is less important than trust. One traitor equals a breach. And you have the psychological resilience. Military data shows morale and routine can double group survival in time of siege style conditions, okay? Then you have the mobile survival versus fortification. Some experts argue for mobility, staying light, scavenging, never letting the horde surround you. But mobility requires fuel, constant vigilance, and reliable way to sleep without being eaten. Romero's world punishes motion and stagnation equally. The real skill is knowing when to move and when to dig in, okay? So the human factor to this is every film proves that the dead are predictable, people aren't, all right? In fighting, selfishness, even misplaced heroism, kill more characters than bites ever fucking do. A real outbreak would magnify these laws, families torn between loyalty and safety, neighbors demanding refuge. You'll face moral choices with no good answers. So do you risk a rescue mission for strangers? Do you quarantine a bitten friend or put them down immediately? Do you share food with someone who can't even pull their fucking weight? These are hypotheticals, but they're also the decisions that determine whether you see another sunrise. And if you get every decision right, there's still the ultimate question. What happens when the survivors stop fighting each other long enough to fight back against nature itself? Because in the next chapter, we're leaving the barricades behind and running the numbers. We're gonna match Romero's nightmare against the real science, modern weapons, and the brutal limits of biology to see if humans could ever reclaim the world from the dead. Reality check. What if this happened tomorrow? We've explored the biology, we've watched society crumble, but let's step out of the movies for a minute and run the numbers on our actual world. What happens if Romero's rules go live tonight? Here's the starting gun, right? Remember, everyone who dies comes back, and that means that the outbreak begins everywhere, all at once. There's no patient zero, there's no ground zero, everything is everywhere. Hospitals, war zones, everywhere. Literally fucking everywhere is going to become the ground zero for the apocalypse, okay? Because remember the statistics, everybody dies, 160,000 people die per day. Let's talk about the spread velocity, okay? Because the CDC pandemic models show that a pathogen with 100% fatality and reanimation rate could trigger total global collapse within 2 to 3 weeks, even if it moves slower than rabies. Cities like New York and Tokyo would lose control within 72 hours simply from natural death rates alone, and that's before a single bite even makes the fucking news, which nobody's gonna believe anyway. And now we have the military response, okay? Modern armies are faster and better armed than anything in Romero's films from the 60s, 70s, and 80s. We have, drones, satellite surveillance, and on paper, humanity, should fucking dominate. Unfortunately, attrition kills the plan because every casualty adds to the enemy, urban combat becomes a fucking meat grinder, and the ethical calculus bombing hospitals, torching neighborhoods would stall decision-making until it is way too late. Climate and geography, heat, rapid decomposition shortens zombie shelf life, but also accelerates disease spread within the living. So also remember the cold freezes bodies, preserving muscle tissue and extending mobility of the zombies. Islands and mountains are natural barriers and they help, but supply shortages turn isolation into another fucking tomb. And remember the decay timeline. Without circulation, muscle fibers break down within days. In summer heat, a ghoul might lose full mobility within 5 to 10 days. In sub-zero winters, that could be weeks. But here's the catch. If everyone who dies turns, then we have fresh recruits that keep replenishing the hordes faster than the decay can even end it. Now here's where we have a problem with the psychological fallout. Real disasters teach us that fear is more contagious than any virus. So panic buying, militia groups, and mass migration would create kill zones long before the dead even arrive. Civil wars would also erupt as governments enforce brutal containment you know? So let's also talk about the survivability. Statistical modeling puts individual survival odds below 10% in urban centers after week 1. So I'm fucked, 'cause I live in Las Vegas. Rural areas might stretch to 30 to 40% if groups remain small, silent, and well supplied. And then we have long-term survival that would just hinge on renewable food, clean water, and ruthless willingness to, you know, call the infected. So, in short, modern tech might slow the outbreak, but human nature still guarantees a body count high enough to tip the scales. Romero's nightmare isn't just possible, it's alarmingly efficient. And yet, even in a world crawling with the dead, life doesn't just simply stop. The human instinct to adapt, to rebuild, to carve out meaning from the ruins, that's the final frontier Romero leaves for us to explore. So now that we've reached the end of this video, we've mapped the biology, we've tracked the collapse, and we've run the math on a dead planet. And still Romero never gave us a cure, a savior, or even any sort of final answer, because the truth was never about the dead. It's the message of Romero's dead films are literally about us. Romero's zombies don't scheme, negotiate, or dream, okay? They walk, they bite, and they fucking wait. And in their mindless persistence, they force us to confront the questions that, you know, we keep burying under the noise and technology that we have. How fragile is our society when the power flickers out? How thin is that line between neighbor and threat? How long before survival completely erodes morality? Every Romero film ends the exact same way. Humanity survives for now, okay? The farmhouse is burned, the mall is overrun, the bunker is fucking overrun. All right? Everything's overrun in the end. The zombies make their fucking way in. It's inevitable. Survivors scatter into a future that may already be fucking lost. And you know what? Maybe that's the real lesson we need to take away from this. The apocalypse isn't a single night or a headline. It's a slow unraveling that we choose to ignore until it's too late. Look at 2020, man. So I want you to ask yourself, if the living dead rose tomorrow, would you barricade the doors, or would you already be one of them, mindlessly consuming, waiting for someone else to tell you what's safe? Romero never gave us hope in his films, but he did give us a mirror to look through. This has been Science of the Living Dead. Thank you so much for watching, and I really appreciate if you got through this whole fucking video. I know this has been a lot. This is longer than my Evil Dead one. But yeah, thank you guys for watching Science of the Living Dead, and just, you know, remember, stay sharp, and, you know, sometimes the real monster isn't out there, it's the part of us that refuses to think until the world is already fucking dead, okay? That's all I got. And also, I just want you to remember, when there is no more room in hell, the dead will walk the earth, and unfortunately, we'll be walking with them. So, we're all in hell.